Hello, folks. You're listening to another episode of the Going Rogue Gaming Podcast, the Grog Pod. Welcome back to the Grog Pod. This episode, we're covering a titan of video games. We're covering two of them, actually, but we'll get into it, but they're kind of the same game. It's the Binding of Isaac episode. Probably the spooktacularist episode, I'd probably say, from the ones that we're planning on covering. It's very thematic that we're covering this towards the end of October. Halloween's right around the corner, and yeah, we got a spook fest for you here with lots of ghouls and poop and demonic imagery enough to really fill the Halloween sack there. So yeah,
they definitely chose trick over treat.
But there's lots of treats in here as well, too, I think. But yeah, let's start with talking about the 2011 release, The Binding of Isaac. If you have never heard of this game before, and you're one of maybe 10 people who have never played it, this is I think like the design of this game is also a great counterpoint to the one that we just talked about with Dungeons of Dreadmore, because this is a very much action oriented game. Dreadmore very turn-based, this a lot more everything happening all at once. It's a twin stick shooter. It's if you've ever played a twin stick shooter before, where you're moving around your character with one stick and shooting in directions with another stick. But it's like if you took that and dropped it into The Legend of Zelda and also slapped on an aesthetic of demonic imagery on top of there. So kind of a lot going on. This game in 2011 was released on PC, Mac, and Linux. This was a game that was based entirely on the Adobe Flash engine, so at the time it was a little limited. But this was one of those games that really kind of like blew up the indie scene at the time. Lots of Flash games were in abundance there, and this is kind of a titan of that time. This is the 17th highest rated Rogue on Steam, with 50,000 reviews. This tops out in the 99th percentile, and this was made by two mega devs of the indie game pantheon. We have Florian Himsel, who's an Australian, oh my god, he is an Austrian game programmer. I'm sure he never gets that confused, with doing a lot of programming contributions to the predecessor to this game somewhat, Super Meat Boy, and also working on other games like Coil and Ball Frog. And the kind of brainchild behind this game, Edmund McMillan, who is, I think we could probably have like a whole series of podcasts just dedicated to this fellow, but he got his start with indie comics and zines back in the day, before jumping into Flash game development. Do you guys have much experience playing with Flash games in the past?
I mean, we're all children at some point, I think, and that was what the internet had, I think, around the MySpace era, was if you wanted to play some kind of game, it's going to be, what's the Australian splunking game? The, I don't know, there was all, yeah, you're raising your eyebrows, questioning, yeah, there are a ton of them out there, and I think we all had our fill at some point in around the mid-2000s and prior.
I feel like none of them. I know for sure that I played Flash games as a child, but I feel like none of them were actually good enough to quite rise to the level of like, oh yeah.
Was RuneScape? Was RuneScape a Flash game? I don't think it was, or I don't really know what powered that. Maybe it had its own thing, but
I feel like RuneScape was probably popular enough in like the pre-Flash era where to actually use like a real game engine.
That sounds about right. Okay, so yeah, I don't know, Flash, not Flash. I have no recollection of any good Flash games then.
But you probably I guarantee we all spend a lot of time on like Newgrounds and stuff at least.
Yeah, Newground. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember some shitty tank games and like some shitty there's just
Yeah,
a
I
bunch
feel like
of
there were a lot of
category
games.
shitty games.
There were a lot of games that were like 1-day games.
Yeah.
You know, you play and you get your fill in one sitting.
Mhm.
Which I mean, I never actually played the original Binding of Isaac, so I don't know how much dissimilar or similar that is. I know that the Rebirth has significantly more content, which I'm sure you're going to go into, but yeah, it definitely seems like it's of a different level of replayability and whatnot going on with it.
Almost kind of like a different, like when you boot up a Flash game, it feels like a different era of history almost that you're interacting with. Like it has like it's almost impossible to describe in an auditory medium, but like the way that it moves, the kind of like just maybe clunkiness of it, you can really feel the engine.
Well, and a lot of them you
cases.
can't save, so
Yeah, that's true.
you can't. The nature of them, in some ways, lends itself well to something like Binding of Isaac, where you are playing runs through. But if you're trying to build a different kind of game, you are limited to what you can do in one sitting. So if you do well, great. If you want to come back to it the next day, it's not like today where the cookies in your browser save your progress for random things. You just start it over the next day.
I'm gonna have to disagree with you pretty strongly here, though, about that, Colin, because the Binding of Isaac, like, it's so narrative and like save based. Like, if you didn't have the fact that it saved your progress as you go through the narrative, and I don't know how much of the game you played, but that
I'm assuming that that's something that came into effect more in Rebirth and less
maybe
in
that's
the
the
original
case.
Flash game. I can imagine you having a similar version of this game, the Flash version, the early version, where you don't. You get better at it by like memorizing the items and combinations, stuff like that.
Yeah, so real quick, just finishing up stuff on Edmund here, our lead dev. Flash game background, but I think he was more kind of like on the designer end of the spectrum. I don't think he was really like that heavily involved in like programming a lot of this stuff, but he did reach out to programmers to really help kind of bootstrap his game designs. He was featured in Indie Game the Movie, which was a popular Kickstarter that was in the early days of Kickstarter, and he with Florian helped to develop a Super Meat Boy. Have either of you broken a controller over Super Meat Boy like I have?
I mean, I touched the game because I saw you playing it one day. I'm like, oh, what's this? And I said, nope, this is not my kind of game.
Yeah, I played it and it was hard, and I am not good enough at video games to play it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Twitch reaction sort of like 2D, like that side. It's just it's 2D. Like, that's just generally not my kind of game, with some notable exceptions.
Yeah. So Edmund, launched Super Meat Boy to massive critical acclaim at the time, and that really helped to set him up for success for Binding of Isaac here. All the accolades and revenue that he generated out from Super Meat Boy helped to really kind of give him that kind of risky foundation to kind of pivot off for Isaac. And I think when he was, we'll get into it in a minute here, but like, I don't think he was expecting Isaac to be as big of a success as it was. So he kind of went in with sort of low expectations, but yeah, so we've said the phrase Binding of Isaac a lot so far. Will, as our resident Bible expert, can you give us a quick rundown of what the biblical account of the Binding of Isaac
the story
is?
of Isaac?
Yeah, and so in the Bible, in the actual Bible, there is this character Abraham, and Abraham has a son Isaac, and the story goes that basically God wants him to prove that he fears him, that he loves him, that all that crap all at once, and so he has him bind his son to essentially a platform for sacrifice, and just as and commands him to kill his son to prove all this crap, and just as he's about to plunge the dagger into his son's chest, Isaac's chest, an angel appeared before him, and the angel says, "You've just proven yourself. You don't actually have to kill him." And
Good job, you got the loyalty achievement.
Right. And so that's why it's Isaac here and the binding of Isaac. In theory, though, well, I'll let you go ahead and talk more about the narrative, but there is a major difference between the biblical interpretation and what we see in the story here.
That's right. And yeah, I think like there's a lot of interesting twists that I think the developer Edmund McMillan put on here to kind of mimic his own upbringing, maybe not to a super deep extent, but enough of a spin on it to really kind of give it its own unique flavor. So this game, Binding of Isaac 2011, was the result of a week-long game jam between McMillan and Florian to develop this kind of Legend of Zelda-like roguelike game where McMillan wanted to showcase his feelings about both the positive and negative aspects of religion that he had to come to discover from conflicts between his Catholic and born-again Christian family members while growing up. McMillan had considered the title a risk, but once he could take the financial success of Super Meat Boy, he released it without much fanfare to Steam in 2011 without expecting a whole lot of sales. But he was noticing that the game kept like gaining popularity every month and like sales kept like compounding. And I think this was largely driven by Let's Play YouTube videos at the time. This was, 2011, YouTube was a completely different era back then. And, Let's Play videos were only just kind of coming on the scene. And this was like a major driver for people's interest in the game. Like, oh my God, look at this thing. And people being able to see other people's very different experiences to what they had played, being like, oh, I want to see how to unlock this weird thing. They released an expansion titled Wrath of the Lamb in May 2012. But we're limited from releasing future expansions because I think they just maxed out the Flash engine at that point. They started to work with Nintendo in 2012 to release a 3DS version, but Nintendo kind of backed out of the deal, citing controversy of the game's religious themes. And then he would, later to get the game on Steam. But yeah, can you imagine this game being controversial when it first launched?
Yeah,
No,
you were saying the thought the title would be controversial. I feel like it's not the title, it's the rest of it.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, the game itself being a controversial take. But yeah, you can kind of tell from gameplay of this that it was pretty well influenced by Spelunky, the original Spelunky version. We'll get to the remastered one later, but the original Spelunky version was released, I think, in 2008. Influences from Diablo in here. I don't know if either of you have played the Smash Super Nintendo game Smash TV at all. Very kind of like room based. You're a character running around and you're shooting stuff in a twin stick shooter kind of format. But McMillan had some interesting stuff about this game where like we said with Binding of Isaac, Abraham sacrificing his son. The twist here is that it's Isaac's mother who is watching Christian broadcasting TV that commands her to kill Isaac. And
well, she claims it's a voice of God, like in the actual narrative, which I know just because I have listened to it just recently. So it is, from her point of view, God commanding her to kill her son, but first depriving him of clothes, of toys, and then finally his life.
It is weird, like how I mean, I've heard the story of Isaac growing up, but hearing it in a modern context definitely feels much worse. It's like, oh, it felt, like the game itself is very cartoonish, but just the intro is, it's like cartoonish but dark. You're like, yeah, okay, this is talking about like this child being abused, and all of this stuff is cartoonish. You're shooting tears out of his eyes as the bullets, but like it's dark when you stop and actually think about like the shit that's happening to him.
And that's one of its best treats. If we go on the trick and treat scale, one of the biggest treats is like the 2D like animations of like the characters, the narrative, or like the actual narrator talking over it. Like that to me was what set this game apart from pretty much everything else in the entire genre. Was this dedication to not only just the narrative and having a strong narrative. I mean, biblical roots is great because then it has some kind of connection to reality, but then like everything within the game is derived from that core story, which I think is something that a lot of games miss, even some of my favorites.
Yeah, there's interesting kind of like I think at the time I could see this being very controversial with its themes of like, you know, demonic symbolism with you're a naked 5-year-old running around dungeons and there's poop everywhere and you're like there's like blood and guts and lots of like enough viscera to almost make like a Mortal Kombat game blush in a couple senses. But yeah, like I could see how in 2011, and it feels quaint now, like when you play it, you're just like, oh, you're a little cartoon character. Like video games I feel have kind of like turned a corner of, you know, violence and controversial topics that this just kind of just seems like, yeah, this it's fine. You know, it's not anything that would turn your hair white in 2022 at all.
Yeah.
But yeah, at the time when games had to go through a bunch of flaming hula hoops to get listed on Steam, to get published with Nintendo and Xbox and all that, yeah, you could definitely see that, like Nintendo being like, hey, could you maybe tone down like the
Blasphemy?
baby murder down by like 5%?
Well, and there's like some stuff where I mean we've all played Final Fantasy, like the classic JRPG, religion is the enemy, et cetera, but it's rarely like so explicitly this specific Christian story. Like demonic energy in Diablo doesn't feel like it's an attack on Christianity in any way. Like it's I guess you're lifting like names from the Bible, but it's like you got little red imps running around. I mean, the start of this story is just a story of
The Bible.
yeah.
It's
So-
just like, yeah, let's just take this exact story and then like replicate it with, instead of a father or mother.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And imply that it's bad. Or
Or
not
that
even
it's
imply,
that
just-
it's making that the religion made the mother crazy. And
Right,
that
yeah.
religion makes people crazy and have outlandish, ridiculous beliefs.
But
Which, of course, I
religion
don't think.
also allows you to get a pentagram carved into your forehead that allows you to shoot laser tears. So, you know, you have your pros and your cons there, I think.
Unless you're Azazel or whatever his name is, then you just do it by default. But yeah.
Yeah, so 2011, let's see. So we've kind of talked a lot about the game, but like what do you do in the game? Like so your main goal here is, we've kind of talked about the intro cinematic of Isaac being deprived of all of his stuff and his Christian mother coming to kill him, and he escapes into the basement of the house. And that's kind of where your journey begins. There are some like not palette swaps, but like kind of remixes of some of these floors, but generally speaking, you progress deeper through different levels of this underground labyrinth beneath your house, to eventually, you know, go from the house basement a couple of levels down into the caves that are underneath there, down into the depths, encountering all sorts of weird and insane monsters along the way, and eventually to fight Mom at the end as the final boss.
Hey, spoiler alert. Are we allowed to talk about that kind of stuff? I mean, like, can we talk about the end game or the end game? Because you just represented it, I will say, truthfully or not, depending on how we want to.
Yeah, and that's another thing. Yeah, so I think if you've made it this far in the podcast, spoilers abound, but there's so much content in these games, I don't think you can realistically spoil any of it, because there's just like there's so much stuff in here that I don't know that really anybody would ever see it all, unless this is the only game that you're planning on playing for the next 5 years.
I mean, in 60 hours, I think, I got through every unlock and every ending. So I think
Every ending.
Yeah.
Wow. Impressive. I think I've only gotten maybe through maybe 12 or 13 endings in 55 hours. But even like just okay, so we'll come to Rebirth
I think
here in a
that
minute, but
spoilers are okay for games that are 10 years old.
yes, that's also
Okay.
true. So
If you wanted to have played this game by now, you could have done so.
Yeah.
I still want people to play it though, is the thing. It's like I don't want to give away something that prevents or but whatever.
So in Binding of Isaac, you're dropped into rectangular kind of rooms filled with monsters like zombies or headless I guess headless children that are spurting blood at you, and spiders that have bombs on them that will blow up, and crying mutated babies, and just also like, if you can think of something weird and demented, it's probably in this game. Just festering pustules with legs walking around spurting blood.
Literal poop. Poop will charge
but
you
also,
and it
like,
will fuck you up.
In some ways, it's a child's imagination of a demonic world. Like, all of a child's fears come to life.
And that's really highlighted in the cutscenes too, with like, oftentimes it's like him having something, happen to him, whereas like he's on the toilet, or whether what was it? He was on the toilet and like his mother came in or something, or like there was no toilet paper. That's what it was. And then he had this shock and this horrid look like, oh no, there's no toilet paper. And that's like what we see.
And that's the pain that he must bear as his existence. All of these kind of cartoonishy things, or like being at school and someone pantses him and everyone points and laughs. Oh my god, my life. I can definitely understand the spider fear though, living or growing up and like playing around in the basement and seeing like a giant spider that at the time I was just like completely freaked out by. Be like, oh my god, this is the scariest thing ever. And now I routinely rescue spiders that are trapped in the shower as my good deed to the universe. So,
well, that's a mistake.
But yeah, so in this game, you progress through different layers of dungeon-like levels, basement caves to the depths. You defeat Mom. Once you've defeat Mom, you can go to the womb ? Where you can fight the next level boss, which I believe is a heart-pounding fetus of some sort. You beat that enough times, and you unlock Sheol, which I don't know if that's in the Bible. I don't think I've ever heard of Sheol before. But another kind of like dark demonic plane-like existence, where in this 2011 version, your ultimate goal, should you choose to make it this far, is to defeat Satan himself by getting to this Sheol level and fighting this Super Satan final boss. And then that's kind of the end of the game there. But along the way, you'll encounter rooms full of monsters. You'll find like treasure rooms that have all sorts of wacky power-ups. We kind of talked about a few of them, where sometimes the tiers that your character shoots out, the bullet equivalent, will change to lasers, or they'll be homing missiles, or
charm the enemy.
Psychic homing tiers.
Exactly. There are shops where you can go and buy things with coins that you find throughout the game. There are curse rooms that you can walk over a pit of spikes and sacrifice some of your health as a chance for a reward. There are combat challenge rooms that you can fight a whole bunch of monsters simultaneously for a chance at some better loot. And then there's passive power-ups that I think in the Dreadmore episode, we were lamenting the fact that when you picked up stuff, it didn't change how your character looks. Your character gets messed up in this game.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things about this game that I like the most, is how well they implemented power-ups and items changing your appearance. I think they did a really, like, it's a very vivid change for everything. And it's not just like put on a little piece of clothing. It's like your head changes, or you've got horns growing out of your face, or like weird growths. And it did a good job of reflecting like what you were doing in your build or your path through the dungeons. Versus Dreadmore, which just looked like the same guy the whole time with giant eyebrows.
I would imagine that there's an item in here that does alter your eyebrow size. But yeah, you pick up something like a can of dog food, and that will give you more health, but will also make your character larger as a result. You can pick up I think after some boss fights, like demon doors will open up where you can offer some of your health, and you'll get like demonic aligned powers that are kind of more devil based, maybe do more damage, but higher risk, higher reward kind of thing. There are angel rooms that just kind of give you more kind of like protective buffs and things like that. But oh yeah, there's also other items that you can use in this game, like bombs and tarot cards and pills and more kind of usable items. Things that it's almost kind of like a hybrid of like Bomberman in a way, with the amount of like boulders and objects in throughout the room. And in some cases, some of the boss fights actually feel kind of Bomberman-y as well.
Yeah, there's 4 different I mean, at least on the Xbox controller that I'm using, there's 4 different controller or like auxiliary sort of things that you can shoot. You know, the bomb, the special, the like kind of tarot card or pill, and then I'm forgetting the last one, but like essentially 4 different like things you can do to like use a one-time consumable throughout your gameplay.
It's probably important to point out that pills, you're the aesthetic here of, you know, you're fumbling around through the basement finding mom's pills that you don't know what they do, and once you use it, then you've identified it for the rest of the run. But at the time, you're just like, well, I have 1 heart left. Do I use this weird mystery pill? And then it could kill you, because it could say like, oh, health down or something. Or it could give you, you know, some sort of passive buff going along the way, or it just makes a fart sound in some cases. So you have kind of a spectrum of good, medium, bad.
Yeah, I didn't really get the until just now. I didn't realize like, oh, if you're finding mom's pills, and that's why you don't know what they are, because you're a child finding random pills, and you just eat a pill. Who knows what it'll do?
But if you find the same one twice, then you know what it does the second time. And so that's the benefit of like having used a pill. But I have pills firmly in my dislike category, just because, yeah, like going into the game, you have no idea what the distribution is of good to bad to neutral pills. And like, yep, you're inclined to like try things out, but like you have to just consume so many pills before you kind of like take this Bayesian approach to like, hey, is a pill good or not to have? When should I have it? Like, it takes so long to form a strategy around pill consumption that you could easily like learn by like reading a wiki.
My problem with pills is that it did not have any way to record what the pills did, even if you could figure it out. So you're like, oh, there's a pill across these spikes. Should I go try and get it? And you're like, I can't remember which one that is. I don't know if I've tried it or not. Like, I might be willing to sacrifice some life to go get a pill that I know is good, but I'm definitely not going to do it for a mystery that might be bad, and then I lost life to do something bad. Like, that's not a
that's a bad experience. Yeah.
Well, I think it kind of ties back to that risk reward element also, where like, oh, here's a thing that could be beneficial, but maybe not. Like, is it worth that risk to try to go get that thing to make your run just that little bit better? There are some passive items, I believe, that actually do like pill identification for you, not like showing them on the screen, because that, I mean, that's one thing that I think like is kind of like a balance of like crypticness in this game, of like, you'll pick up an item and it will just say like, you picked up Guppy's head, and sometimes it will tell you exactly what it does, and other times it will say like, the fluffiness abounds or something mysterious like that, and you're just like, what? Like,
right, and then you go look at what it does on the wiki.
That's the thing. It's like, if you look at the wiki, then you suddenly like have a power that you shouldn't have, that the game developers don't want you to have, but they use that because they forget what their own stupid items do in the game. Like, I just think it's a terrible mechanic. How many items are there in this game? There's active and there's passive. You have to know which is active and which is passive, otherwise you'll replace things, or you spend money on things that is like, I don't know. There's 200.
There in the 2011 version, there are somewhere around 200 items, and these are the things including that you specifically pick up that alter your character in such a way. So there's, yeah, so like we've talked about, like, you know, you beat a boss, there's a little pedestal, you pick up the item. There's roughly 200-ish of those in this 2011 release. So kind of a lot to kind of keep track of, but like, if I'm guessing like at the time, if you were like super into this game and you were just like playing it nonstop, hours and hours and hours a day, you would build up that muscle memory of like, okay, yep, there's the fish head. I know exactly what that does. Not going to worry about it. I'm going to go for the laser eyes. I know that works really well for this build. But yeah, it's one of those things where like, I can understand not wanting to overload the player with text. We'll come to some of those games in future episodes. Oh boy, will we ever. But in this case, I think it kind of works because like to keep the game flowing and being like moving on, like, okay, I picked up this thing, the fluffiness abounds. Great, let's move on. And let me experiment and see how this thing works.
I just picked up so just before joining this call, I was, doing a refresher because, even though I have 60 hours, it's in the past. And like, I picked up an item that made it so that my tier, I shoot really fast, but at very low damage. And as Azazel, as I'll discuss, is the most overpowered character in the game. But the point is that like that completely destroys all of that character's ability to do anything. And so I had no idea picking this thing up completely destroyed the run. Yep. And that is a uniquely terrible experience. I understand that it's a roguelike. They want you to die again. But like, that's just shitty. And like, that makes me not want to play even though I'm done with 60 hours. Okay. Yeah, you got me. Okay. I admit I had the wiki open though 100% of the time. I had multiple tabs with like, here are all the here are all the active passive items. And I memorized it. When you memorize it all, the game's fun. Mm-hmm. When you don't have it memorized, sucks.
Yeah, I just picked up everything.
Let's you kind of do that. You pick up everything then, and then you get the luck of the draw if the thing you picked up was good or not.
Let's move on briefly to talking about Binding of Isaac Rebirth. So this was a 2014 re-release of the 2011 game. You can tell immeditely that this is a complete remaster and rebuild of the original. It doesn't really feel the same kind of sluggishness that you get from the Flash engine. And this one was released everywhere. This was part of a partnership that the game designer Edmund McMillan did by reaching out to getting a more full-fledged dev studio involved. And you can find it literally anywhere: Linux, Windows, Mac, PS4, Vita, Nintendo 3DS. It finally made it onto. It was released on Wii U, Xbox One, iOS. Recently released on the Switch, PS5, Xbox Series X and S, and on Steam, of course. But holy shit, this game is everywhere, and with good reason. Because I think this is the far better playing game. This one, numbers wise, ranks in at the second most popular game in the rogue genre at 209,000 reviews on Steam, compared to the previous entry only at 50,000. So it has made a much bigger splash since then. McMillan at the time partnered with Nicalis, I think it's pronounced, the game publisher who also put out games VVVVVV and Cave Story. The V game is really good. I recommend that one. Cave Story is also pretty good. Both very much relics of their time of the early indie scene, I would say. And yeah, in this case, they both worked together to bring in additional features that they had planned for previously, but the Flash engine just wasn't doing them any favors and really holding them back. So they rebuilt the game from the ground up in C++. It is so much smoother, just a night and day difference, I feel like. And a lot of people cite this game, this 2014 remaster, as one of the best roguelike games of all time. I think a big plus in the favor column here is that it finally has controller support. I think there's a lot of hoops you have to jump through to get the original 2011 one to work with gamepad stuff, because otherwise the keyboard bindings are fine, but this game I think like really suits that controller based twin stick shooter approach a lot better. The art style here is also slightly different, where in the 2011 one it's kind of a more vectorized or rasterized graphics, and here it's a little more pixel arty. I think there was actually a pretty big pushback when this game was first released about how, oh my god, like the art style is so pixely, and it's just kind of like catering to the lowest common denominator of every indie game has to have like pixel graphics. But I think the fact that Will and I have spent 60 plus hours in this version versus the old one kind of speaks to its draw and its lasting legacy. The music here is also slightly different. The 2011 one, I think, has a little bit of a mysterious tone. This one is maybe a little more action-y. They're like slightly different, but I don't think, you know, one is better than the other in any kind of significant fashion. But the main draw here is content. Oh boy, is there content. There is everything that we've kind of talked about is at least like doubled. We talked about items, 200 items in the previous one, almost I think around 700 items in the re-release in 2014. Characters went from 9 to 30. Room types, so things like treasure rooms or sacrifice rooms or challenge rooms, things like that, went from 16 to 25. We went from 74 types of monsters in the first one to 106. We went from 66 bosses to 141 bosses. Not that you have to beat them all, but I guess you probably wind up will after 60 plus hours of gameplay. Chapters, 12 in the original one to 32 in this one. And endings, 13 in the original to 21. I think at least 21. I'm sure there's a new one almost added every day these days. But
are you counting? Is this the stats for including all the various DLCs?
This is including all the DLCs as well.
Yeah.
So
okay.
yeah.
How many were there?
I have not done these DLCs. So
yeah. So DLCs. So the remaster released in 2014. The first DLC, Afterbirth, was released in 2015. To pretty good reviews. This was something that I think a lot of people was waiting for, and also they really liked. The next year, and in that release, they released like mod tools and things to really allow people to kind of generate their own kind of content. And the next year in 2016, a bunch of modders grouped together to release their own kind of fan expansion called Anti-Birth. Love the naming convention here. And in a lot of cases, like, there's this fine line of game developers seeing the community build like user generated content and really kind of like hammering it down, saying like, no, you can't release this. That's probably more true for the bigger studios, but McMillan here, I think, reached out to the devs and wanted to work with them to help like bring that content in officially, which was super cool because he didn't have to. He could have just sent DMCA or copyright notice, say like, quit doing that. But I think that played really well, and also made it so he didn't have to stress as much about development work. I think the developer,
you can get away with good DLC or a good mod content instead of DLC.
mm-hmm.
That extends the life of your game immensely. Like, I don't really understand why so many devs are as dead set against mods as they are. I guess you can't sell DLC if your DLCs are worse than the mods, but
that's true. And there's weird stuff about licensing too, where like if user generated content starts to become popular enough, then it starts to become like this weird legal gray area of like, well, like, can they solicit donations and stuff? But anyway, so there were 2 more DLCs released, one in 2017, Afterbirth. 2017 was Afterbirth Plus. And this one I think had more mixed reviews. A common thread throughout the Binding of Isaac's development is that because I think the McMillan didn't really expect this game to be a huge success. He didn't really do like he didn't hire a quality assurance team to like iron out a lot of bugs beforehand. So almost all of these releases and DLCs at first like launched super buggy. And I think he was kind of leaning on the community to do sort of like crowdsourced bug fixing for the games, which I can understand. And I can understand people's frustration with that when it first launches, because you kind of expect a more sort of polished product. So I can kind of see it both ways. And I think Afterbirth Plus suffered from this as well, where like there's so much more content. There's like edge casing all of the software stuff is just an absolute nightmare.
This is the kind of stuff that, I mean, if it was being made today, the DLCs would go into like early access and then they'd get ironed out in that. And I mean, you're like, well, it's early access, so you can't complain that hard.
Exactly.
But I mean, that is true in some ways. That's where you get the fan testing rather than when you're coming out with a game in 2015 or 2017, people kind of mean, I guess by 2017, not as much, but people expected the game to work and not to have to wait 3 or 4 different update cycles for it to get all the major bugs out.
The final expansion for this game, Repentance, came out last year in 2021 and rolled in a lot of that content from the fan mod Antibirth into it. So this is where McMillan had kind of worked with that mod team to kind of like bring it into a more official product, I think with the intent of, making sure that they get the recognition and, possibly monetary payment that they deserve. And that one also, I think, kind of launched to mixed reviews. I don't remember if that had the same issue of launching buggy and maybe getting fixed over time, but the legacy for this game series, or even just the 2014 re-release, has seen 5 million plus total sales across all those platforms. So I think the legacy here has endured. I don't know that there's really much more in the future for this game. There was a prequel, The Legend of Bumbo, that was released relatively recently. But I don't think that that's had as big of a impact or cultural splash as this game has.
The Drowning of Jonas.
Is that another biblical?
No, I'm just
roguelike
proposing the next iteration here, because you just take some biblical theme and you give it this kind of structure of the title.
Isaac grows up, changes his name.
Yeah, but like Jonah. Who's in the whale? I don't remember. Jonah in the whale. Yeah, Jonah. It's got to be Jonah, not Jonas.
Jonas is like the Jonas Brothers.
Yeah, so it's been so long,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm basically Isaac in many ways, so I had that upbringing, but I can't remember the details here. I'm surprised that I remember Abraham, but
well, I remember that Simpsons episode where Bart and Lisa get baptized by Flanders, and he's going through all of like the crazy Bible stories. Like that's at least like 2 or 3 other sequels or follow-ups that you could do, like a 3D version of Isaac called The Serpent of Rehoboam, or you got The Well of Zohasadar, or The Bridal Feast of Beth Chetruzarazed.
What? I do not remember these Bible stories. I mean, you could do, what was the Nebuchadnezzar and throwing them in the flames. I mean, there's a bunch of good, weird, hardcore shit in the Old Testament that you could have expanded this out into.
Yeah. Zacchaeus on a tree. I mean, Zacchaeus fall from tree, or that doesn't work so well.
Not quite the same ring.
Well, cool. Let's move on to ranking these games. So as part of being the most data-based roguelike podcast out there, our end goal is to rank all of these games to figure out how they all stack up against each other. And so far, the number one game that we have on all of our lists is Dungeons of Dreadmore, because we've only done one other episode. But this second episode, we have a dearth. We've literally tripled the number of episodes that we have.
150% increase.
50%. There you go. That's why we welcome to data. So we have 3 games. We have Dreadmore. We got the 2011 release of Isaac, and we have the 2014 release of Isaac. Where, I guess, let's start with Colin. Where would you rank these?
Well, I didn't play the 2011 one, so I'm going to go ahead and say that this is probably the best roguelike we've played so far on the podcast.
So you're putting it on your number one. I guess, like, maybe we'll also
I'll go ahead and say obviously we've only done 2, so it's I preferred it to Dungeons of Dreadmore, but I also think that if I were to guess where it might land in the long run, I'm guessing it would probably be in the upper quarter. I think it's a well-made game. It's got a pretty good, consistent quality to it. The gameplay is, it's a fun game. There's a reason why it got bought so many times, and why it is at the top of the list of roguelikes. I think at least a little bit of it is aged. It is no longer 2011 or 2014, and I'm no longer, like as an adult, it is a little bit childish in some of the themes, and it probably would have resonated more with me as a younger adult. But I think the gameplay is good, and I think there's a reason why it's still ranked highly on Steam.
Will, how about you? You have Dreadmore as number 1. Where would you put
7.5. This is 7.5 out of 10. Dreadmore is a 6 out of 10.
Well, we need discrete rankings here. Are you gonna put Isaac? Are you gonna put 2014 above Dreadmore and 2011 below?
I didn't do 2011, so I'm gonna go ahead and leave that one out. I'm gonna say that the 2014 version encapsulates all that is the 2011 version, but like better. And so that's a historical sort of like thing I just don't really care all that much about. I think the Rebirth is Rebirth is pretty much what Binding of Isaac is supposed to be, plus all the DLCs. I never actually got to the DLCs, but
the Flash version is the early access.
Yeah, exactly. That's the alpha version or whatever. The one thing I have a list here, like I said, of all my likes and dislikes, and so of all the things, if I had to just boil this down into the one innovative thing beyond the narrative, which I've already kind of talked about, that I think it does, which I think sets the pace for what will come, is item interaction. You can have one like ability essentially interact with another ability such they do wonky, unexpected, delightful things together.
Synergy.
And that is something we see in later games. Most recently, I'm thinking about Vampire Survivors doing like, oh, you get this one item and this other item. They work together to do this weird thing. Yeah, and so that is a tremendous, I think, breakthrough in like the way roguelike games should play out. Is to find those wacky synergies. Yeah.
The first game I won was you built up enough rage and you went into like Super Mario Star mode. But I also had the thing where if you touched something, it got frozen and then exploded into coins. So I ended the game with like an infinite number of coins because I would just, it's like, oh, get hit a couple times and then just go apeshit on everyone. Like that, the interaction between those two made it way more powerful than either one on its own.
Exactly. And so that's why I think that this is a real game changer in terms of its narrative development and it's in that particular aspect of the mechanic within the roguelike game that I don't think we had seen before, at least not to this extent.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Scott, what about you? Where do you put it on your list?
I'm following the peer pressure of the crowd here. I'm putting Rebirth at number 1. I'm putting Dreadmore at number 2 and the OG 2011 Isaac at number 3. I can see the 2011 version of Isaac as kind of like a historical oddity where like if you're a big fan of the Rebirth one and you maybe want like I don't know, like I'm conflicted because like the original one feels like a more pared down and streamlined experience without just like way too much crazy stuff going on. But I feel like that's a principal draw of Rebirth. It's just that there's just so much stuff and so many like wacky, crazy things happening and all of those item synergies that it's just so much more of a complete package. I felt a little miffed having to spend $5 for the original 2011 Binding of Isaac because I was just like, you know what? I'm gonna support the dev. I'm gonna doing it for the pod, but like at the same time, I'm like maybe I could have just played the online free Flash one and gotten the same experience roughly. I
can give you $1.50.
I mean, yeah, and it was kind of annoying that like the original one didn't go on sale like at all ever. Which again, like I can kind of understand like maybe there's a pricing incentive there of like, hey, don't play this one. I'm not going to put it on sale. Don't play this old one. Go play the new one. And I think I would kind of follow that same logic. I will say that the original one does play like pretty well on the Steam Deck once you get all the controllers, the control bindings mapped out. But like compared to the Rebirth one, like night and day. Like I don't think there's any instance where I would want to go back to the original that Rebirth doesn't do better. And I think like maybe the only instances of that are like the art style potentially, and maybe the music, but I don't know that those are enough of a draw for me to want to go to something that, you know, is I think clearly a bigger, more optimized, more fun and engaging experience with Rebirth. So Rebirth, new number one.
If you had to guess, where would you, extrapolating out, do you think it's going to stay near the top of your list in the long term?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think Rebirth is probably, yeah, maybe going to be in that upper quadrant, like you said. Original, I could see when I was first playing the original, I was like, oh my God, this is the new like worst roguelike I've ever played. It just like really, really chugs with that Flash engine. The Rebirth one, like I got there was a period where I got really sucked into it, like really bad, to the point where like I had to play it every day. The wiki was open up on one half of my monitor, the game was going on the other, and anytime I came across an item, oh, I gotta see what this does. This is good or bad for my build. I gotta get to that next ending, gotta get to that next level unlock.
This is me too.
Yeah. And it's super addictive. And I think that's a plus in Rebirth's category. But like once I had gotten into a almost kind of like a dice roll like luck spree, where I was just like rolling like 20 after 20 after 20, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm never gonna repeat this again. And I was able to somehow, of course, with Azazel, the most broken character in the game,
right,
was able to somehow get like, I think like 2 or 3 endings or like major unlocks like simultaneously in one playthrough, and I wound up beating Mega Satan, the one of the final bosses of Rebirth, all in one go. And I was just like, oh my God, like I can't believe I did that. I'm never going to repeat that success ever again, or it's going to be very difficult to. And then I put it down and I walked away for a very long time until playing this for the podcast. So I think like it belongs in that kind of like upper quartile, but I don't know that like the randomness really plays into its favor on any kind of like given run. If your goal is to like beat like the super end boss, if your goal is to just like play a little bit and then like be like, okay, yeah, I died. There's some we didn't even talk about some of the game modes, but like there's some modes in Rebirth that are just like, there's a mode called greed mode, which is just like one floor, it's just like one room, and you do your combat encounters there, and it's got a shop attached to it, and then it just like, it's like a wave based kind of thing. And there's like daily challenges that you can do. I think those are probably like a better draw if you're just gonna like bop in and play the game for like 20 minutes or so. I've been doing that in preparation for this episode and getting a lot of good fun out of it. So I think it depends on your goal. Upper quartile, but I don't see it really breaking through the top 10 maybe.
I want to put this out there just in relation to everything you just said right there. And with regards to like win rates overall, like, because we're going to play a lot, these are all roguelites, right? There's going to be a win rate that you expect. The best roguelike, I haven't actually thought about this thoroughly yet, I'm just throwing it out there, but like, if you have perfect play, you win 80% of the time. Perfect play as a human, and there's a lot of things that you can break that down into a lot of different things, but like if you like, when I think about Slay the Spire, if you select all the right cards, can you win on Ascension 20 80% of the time if you make all the right decisions about when to play things? If you're playing any other if you're playing Vampire Survivors, if you're playing Dicey Dungeons, any of these things, you make the perfect decisions, should you win 80% of the time?
I mean, I feel like for something like Slay the Spire, there is a perfect decision path, but for something like this, I mean, you could probably win every game if you are perfect AI and you don't even need to get a single upgrade. You just like miss every
right,
bullet.
because this is a real time, this is not a turn-based strategy, but like you can imagine, like you can think about every encounter from a human perspective of like, what's my probability of winning if I take this approach or that approach?
Colin, I think you just need to get good, and then you won't have that problem.
I mean, maybe I'm just not that good. So I guess my question for you back is, can you have fun without having a high win rate? And like,
I'm gonna say no.
I'm gonna pretty strongly disagree. And my counterpoint is like, I actually have not played that much of Binding of Isaac, so I lost a fair amount because I'm just not good at it yet. But something like
caveat, I said perfect play. So you start off being shit, but you know your maximum level is 80%. Once you get to mastery, you should have no greater than 80%.
But I don't know if that's the
most
goal
games
here
you're not going to get to mastery. You know, if I'm going to play that game for 15 hours and not 1,000 hours, like, am I going to get joy out of those 15 hours?
And so where to draw that line for like, what should your expected win rate be? Like, you know, it's all in that, like, that whole channel of like difficulty versus ability, and trying to keep it right in that flow state.
For all games, really, it's about the sense of getting better. So if you start off with a 0% win rate, that's fine, as long as you feel like you're getting like an ever increasing win rate. Like you,
or meta progression even.
Or meta progression, or yeah, exactly. It's sense of progression. You have to feel like you are getting further in your goals, be those get good, or be they like unlock new things via out of a single run mechanism. Like this had you could unlock new characters, you can unlock stuff in the store. Like you could get no better, but still progress through unlocks in that way. But yeah, you definitely need that sense of progression. And I don't think you need to win. Like there could be many games where I mean, look at Dark Souls. Like you're just fucking grinding for most of the game, dying most of the time. Like I don't know if you can qualify a win rate for something like that, but how many deaths to how many times do you beat the game?
Certainly context is appropriate. Yeah. But I guess my point here is that I'm interested as we move forward with this podcast to see how this particular element, this game mechanic or component, or I don't know really what to describe it as, but like I want to understand how this, the relevancy of it and how it changes by the game that we're playing.
Yeah, and I think we'll see how that might change between things that are like turn-based versus more kind of real-time versus like everything kind of in between. We got a good lineup coming down the pipe here. And I think
what do we have next time?
Next episode we're covering another bundle of games, because in some cases some of these games you can kind of tell like what they are after maybe only a few minutes. So it kind of makes sense to bundle these together. And next episode we're talking about 3 games: Hack/Loot, we're talking about A Valley Without Wind, and we're also talking about Pineapple Smash Crew.
Well, there you go.
I've had a sneak preview because I did Binding of Isaac. I already know Hack/Loot was the one that I'm excited to see what the other two.
And I as kind of a maybe spoiler for next episode, I also kind of got sucked into Pineapple Smash Crew more so than I thought I would. But yeah, so keep an eye out that for next episode. In the meantime, you can find us on the interwebs at the website grogpod.zone. If you're still using Twitter before Elon Musk has crashed it, you can find us there at grogpod. And if you have correspondence that you would like us to read on the air, you can send that to grogpodzone@gmail.com. And we will, if it passes our sniff test, we'll read it on the air here for all of our tens of listeners to enjoy. So stay tuned for next episode where we're covering some games you probably have never heard of, and we'll see you then.
All right, see you later.